Hello and welcome back to Topdeckers. I'm joined by Gasper and we are here for another episode of Staple or Stinker. Gasper is our neighborhood cards non-expert. He's played a bit of cards, he knows the basic rules, he knows how the mechanics work, but he's not played enough of it to be familiar with the meta and the sort of high-level competitive play that maybe a lot of people who watch the channel are more familiar with. And because of this, he's in a unique position to be tested, and this is what we do here. Staple or Stinker, we get 5 or so cards, we show them to Gasper, and he has to guess whether they are staples, meaning they are just absolute beasts, they're powerhouses, they see a lot of play, or stinkers. And with stinkers, we generally like to pick ones which could be a bit deceiving, maybe they look strong, and maybe there's a bit of a secret there. And vice versa with the staples as well. We like to pick cards where you could potentially underrate them, and we try and trip Gasper up. It's a bit of us versus him, you know, the viewers who comment cards and they give us suggestions, and the team here, we put them together and we face him against Gasper, and we're trying to get him to get as few as possible right. I've got 5 cards here which were suggested by people from the comment section of the last one. So if you want to see more of this, and if you want to see certain cards be guessed, be sure to go down below and drop a comment saying which cards you want to be tested, and we'll see which one's gonna trip him up. And the first card we have today is Comet. Comet is a German elite. It's a 6k fighter, 4 attack, 2 defense, blitz, so it can come into play and attack immediately the moment it comes down, which is quite good, because it does then return to your hand at the end of your turn. So if it couldn't attack straight away, you wouldn't really get to do anything with it at all, which would be rather humorous. But yeah, how are you feeling about this card? Do you think staple? Do you think stinker? Sort of take us through what you're thinking.
These ones you pick really get me, and I think I don't know if it's just me being in my head or anything, but like, immediately when you show this to me, I mean, I've definitely played against it. I don't think I've used it, but I immediately have a strong opinion, and I'm like, yes, it's definitely this. And then I think about it more, I'm like, actually, no, is it? So like, my immediate thought, and it's like, do I trust my gut instinct or do I like review it? I think this is I'm second guessing myself and say it. I think this is an absolute staple, because I think it can have a lot of uses. I was thinking about, if you were probably to, like, 6 seems expensive to play it, but I was thinking even if it was like a 4 cost and had like a 2 operating cost or something, that probably wouldn't seem unreasonable, and it's essentially the same. It's kind of like risk-free. Also, just a rule question, I guess. When you play it and attack something with 1 damage, and it goes to 1 health and comes back, when you play it again, it's on 4 health.
Yeah,
again,
it's gone back
correct?
to 2 health. So long as it doesn't die, so long as you don't kill it in the process, then yeah, you can play it again on
and it starts fresh.
Total. Yeah.
So I'm going to stick with my initial. I'm going to say I think this is an absolute staple.
Now, when this one was suggested in the comments, I thought this is going to definitely trick him up. And I am happy to say, for your sake, we did not trick you up, because this one is a staple.
Oh.
This card is really, really popular. It's seen a lot of play, typically in control decks, where you sort of, you burn out each other's resources, but a control deck, you're getting more value out of your cards. You know, you slow down the board, you halt your opponent, and then this just slowly wins you the game on its own. If your opponent can't find a guard to counter it, or a countermeasure to counter it, then it will inevitably win the game just through sheer sort of, you know, beat down, 4 HP every turn. And you can use it to trade, which is another nice bonus. And then also, it can trade really well into bombers. Now, it's not great into bombers, because one of the nice things about fighters against bombers normally is you're protecting your stuff, because the bomber has to get through the fighter first, and this doesn't offer that. But it's just mainly a staple because of its ability to say, eventually I'm going to win the game, and you're going to have to find a way of answering this, because I'm just going to beat you down, you know, slowly. It's also very powerful in control mirrors. against some decks which have healing, they have a lot of long stay, and they try to outburn their opponent, but they don't have many cards. A good example is Japan Resistance. This has a lot of healing and a lot of AoE and a lot of defensive tools, but it doesn't actually have many ways of answering the Comet itself. So in these sort of matchups, when you get the Comet in your hand, it can essentially decide the whole game in of itself. So yeah, it's a staple, and it will most likely continue to be a staple, and it's so good at ending games, in fact, that it has even seen play in some more aggressive decks. But yeah, I really thought we'd get you of that one. The next one I have for you here is the Char B1 Bis. Now, the Char B1 Bis is a French tank, 5k with 2k operation cost, 3-5, so not the biggest stats ever, but it does have mobilize, so it will grow every time, getting +1/+1 each turn. Heavy armor 2, which is, quite thick armor. Most heavy armor cards only have heavy armor 1, so this is very, very thick armor. And then it has the ability, when this unit loses mobilize, when it finally takes damage and loses mobilize, you do get to then draw a card.
My initial reaction is, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but this card seems absolutely ridiculous. Part of me feels like, I don't know. If it didn't have mobilize or the special mobilize ability, part of me is looking at it thinking a 3-5 heavy armor 2 tank 5 and 2 sounds all right. It doesn't sound awful. I'm trying to think that the Brits have got that tank, which is I think 2-5, and I think it's heavy armor 1. I thought that cost around 5ish. So again, I think, yeah, I'm gonna try and not talk myself out of it, but if it's not, I guess I'm interested to know why it's not. But that card seems incredible to me. I think mobilize is good. It can really ramp it up. Heavy armor 2 in itself, like you said, that's beefy, and it's got a lot of HP. And even when it loses mobilize, I thought that was going to be a negative. Like, you still get an extra card, even though you lose mobilize. So, and I guess even like you said, mobilize only goes away when you lose health. Heavy armor 2 stops you losing, means you can attack things 2 or less and not lose health. So yeah, that card seems incredible to me.
So I am going to have to put a couple disclaimers on this one, I think, just for a couple people in the comments' sake. However, unfortunately, Char B1 Bis is a stinker. And you bring up a lot of excellent points at why it would appear strong at first. And these reasons are exactly why I'm going to be putting a couple disclaimers. Because in slower formats, so places like Draft, or maybe when you first sort of rip this card early in the game, early in your sort of progression in cards, then it's very playable. But the moment you start to get into a more competitive and a more serious sort of setting, it just becomes too slow to be useful. Now, we have seen a few high-tier players try this card out in a few decks, but never to any real success. It's always been a little bit of a novelty. When the deck wins, it's like, oh, it won even though it had the Char B1 Bis. And I think a lot of why it's even seen a little bit of play is because it is so alluring. Heavy armor 2 is so much armor. Mobilize, being able to grow it to a really large body, and then this ability to go card neutral, those all sound really, really good. But the reality is, against any aggressive or mid-range deck, they're just going to ignore this. It's going to cost you another 2 credits to operate. It's not going to really affect the board much. It's just too slow at that stage in the game to be very useful. And against control decks and this sort of thing, a lot of control decks pack a lot of hard removal, a lot of things that can do more than 5 damage, and they're not going to be too worried about the heavy armor especially. It's essentially going to be a 3-5 tank with mobilize, at which point it's obviously a lot less special and a lot less powerful. So it's just sort of, it's too slow to beat aggressive decks, and it doesn't quite bring enough to the table to beat slower decks. That's the sort of issue you have with the Char B1. Generally, when you start to reach around the 5+ credit mark, cards need to either have extremely high value, or they need to give you something the moment they drop onto the board. You need a deployment effect, you need a blitz effect, or you need something like the Comet, where it's actually just going to win you the game. We've got a lot of cards, Blackwatch is a card where this increases the cost of all orders in the enemy hand. Even though, the Blackwatch can die, you can lose that. The moment you play it, you're going to get some value from it, and it's just sort of something your opponent has to deal with and can't ignore. Unlike the Char B1 Bis, where your opponent can see this come down and they can just sort of ignore it and not worry about it too much. But yeah, this is a very, very nice one that someone suggested, and I think it's an excellent example of how cards can appear strong and can even be playable in some formats, but just not in a competitive setting. The next card we have is another heavy armor based card. This one is Men of Steel. This is a Soviet order. It costs 1 credit, and you get to choose one of 2 options. All your units get +1 heavy armor, or remove heavy armor from any unit. Now, when it says all your units get heavy armor, it's all the units on the battlefield get heavy armor, and they get it for the rest of the game. They don't get it until end of turn. It sticks about forever. So it's all your units on the field get +1 heavy armor, or remove heavy armor from a unit. Obviously, the units in your deck and the units in your hand don't get affected by this.
I'm definitely doubting myself after that. That last one was a real good one. It really got me. It almost made me want to watch it not be that good, so that I can. I'm almost in disbelief, but I can see what you mean about the top tier of play. And again, I have an instinct to just be like, this is an absolute staple, because I feel like when I played Russian, and it's probably not. Yeah, obviously there's loads of Russia decks you can do, but a lot of it, one of the ones I played was, getting loads of units onto the field, and this is going to be great, or it's good at, if you're fighting against maybe a massive Shah B1. So my instinct says staple, but then I'm again, definitely after that, sort of question myself, the fact that essentially if you don't have lots of units, or they don't bring any heavy armor, it basically does nothing. But it's only 1 cost, so, and I appreciate your decks need to be very streamlined. So I guess in terms of all round, it's less on the all round, but in the right scenario, which you'd like to build your deck towards, surely it could be very handy. But then I'm gonna kick myself if I do this. You're really messing with my head now. I'm gonna go stinker, because I think if you're in a position where it's good for you, you may as well have something else that's better, and you're probably in a good enough position to do well. And the times that it's going to change your game from a defensive aspect is probably less. So I'm actually going to flip myself. I'm going stinker, but I'm going to be so annoyed with myself if it's the opposite.
So out of every card evaluation you've done so far on this show, this one has been the most accurate one you've done. This card is a stinker, and it's for the exact reasons you listed. Yeah. When this card is good, you're already winning, and it doesn't give you what you need. It doesn't stop AoE, it doesn't stop orders, destroying your board. Because like you said, there's just better things you might want in that situation. Things that give actual defense, things which mean you're going to kill your opponent quicker. And yeah, it costs 1, but generally by the point you have a flooded board, you're going to have more than 1 credit to spare anyway. And that removes heavy armor from the unit. Like you say, sometimes when there's a heavy armor unit, that's going to be really nice. But when you don't have a huge board, and when there's not a heavy armor unit to play this on, sure, it only costs 1 credit, but it's essentially a dead card. Yeah, it's difficult to really explain why on this one, because you've sort of hit the nail on the head. It doesn't help you win that much more, and when you're on the behind, it's just completely useless. So yeah, this one is an absolute stinker, and there's not much more to say. You've nailed that one. The next one is the Spitfire Mark II A. This is another air unit. This is a British one. Once again, 4K fighter with 2 operation costs this time. It's a 4/4 and it has the deployment effect. When it comes into the battlefield, it either gets +2/+2 if your enemy controls an air unit, and if they don't have any air units, it gets Fury instead. So you're going to drop it. If they have an air unit, it will be a 6/6. If they don't, it will just get Fury instead.
This, I don't know, it's been a while since we've done this, but I don't remember this much actual pain in myself trying to get these right, because again, my instinct is this card is brilliant. Like, it's not as expensive. It's like either a 4/2 for either 4/4 fighter or a 4/4 fighter with Fury, or a 6/6 fighter, which is meaty. And I mean, it's an elite. You're dropping a lot of elites today, which, you know, I know they're very rare, very valuable cards, but also I feel like a lot of elites can be sort of misleading, and they often don't get used as much. At least that's how I remember it. I think, but again, I think I wonder if it's down and it's in its perfect spot, then great, it's going to smash. But if it's not in your perfect spot, then it's probably not as good. And if it is in your perfect spot, are you fine without it? But I think it's versatile enough, and obviously you want to have, I think, probably decent control of the board when you play it, because you don't want it to get like sort of pinned down, I guess, really that easily. So I am not going to do what I did last time, and I'm going to stick with my guns and say that the Spitfire is a staple.
Now, you see, what's worrying is, as we get better at the game, as we get better at thinking of things that might slip you up, you seem to be improving at around the same rate we are, because yeah, this is a staple. You are right. This one it brings a lot to the table. It's a very, very meaty boy if he comes in as a 6/6, or he's just a very angry boy if he comes down with Fury. Either way, he's going to be something. And you're right, it is absolutely vulnerable to being pinned down. Pin effects, you know, this is a huge target for them, as well as retreat effects, things which are going to send this back to hand and just delay it as much as possible. But generally, when a unit is a huge target and it gets pinned and retreated a bunch, it's sort of that old thing of there's a really strong unit in the game and someone says, oh, but there's removal. And it's like, yeah, if a unit warrants always being removed and always being dealt with the moment it comes onto the board, then it's probably a good unit. That's generally a good way of determining the unit's actually quite good. And yeah, it just applies so much pressure so quickly. And one of the nice things is this +2/+2 when the enemy controls an air unit. This makes it really, really good at defending against bombers. If your opponent has bombers on the board, this is going to come down as a 6/6, which means bombers aren't going to be able to trade into it. You might think, I kind of want Fury to trade into more bombers efficiently. But if it has Fury as a 4/4, your opponent is just going to trade away their bomber into the Spitfire. It having 6/6 is really, really quite nice when you need it to be a little bit more defensive against the enemy bombers. Yeah, it's just a really powerful elite. It was actually, when it came out, it was a 6/6 by default, and then had the condition to gain Fury. This +2/+2 if they had an air unit. This came later, because when it came out as a 6/6, it was just too potent. It did too much, and they had to reel it in. They had to nerf it and pull it in a bit. But it's still seen a lot of play. It's seen play in Brit Air decks, which are very aggressive, but it's also seen play in control decks as a finisher. It's something which is able to close out the game in a matter of 2 or 3 turns normally, and it just applies so much pressure, as well as offering you this defensive method of dealing with bombers. So yeah, it's a staple. It will probably continue to be a staple. Brit Air has gone a little bit out of meta at the moment, but it's Brit Air. I'm sure it will be back. It never really dies. It's more like a vampire, you know, it just goes and sleeps for a bit and then it comes back and sucks the blood out of your life. The last card is going to be another British card, and it's going to be a Spitfire related card. This is going to be the RAF Ground Crew. It's an infantry for 3 credits and 1 operation cost, but the operation cost isn't so important here because it has 0 attack, does have 4 defense, and it has this very unique ability. Your Spitfires cost 2 less to deploy, and when they're deployed, they get +1/+1. So I feel a little bit unfair not giving you information on the Spitfires in the game because, you know, this card is quite caveated on the Spitfires. At the moment, there are 5 Spitfires which are sort of legal and standard play, and then there is 1 Spitfire which is in the reserve list, meaning it can't be played at the moment. And then obviously there's the committed crew, which I believe we saw before, and there's also another couple Spitfire tribal decks. So there is a sort of structure put in by the developers for a Spitfire deck. So there is sort of the structure to go with this card. The question though, the question is it a staple or is it a stinker?
Presumably when you say there's 5 different, you can also have multiples of those 5.
Yes, there's 5
so
different...
So you could really have a very heavy, and you could have 3 of these. And I'm just gonna, is this a new card?
It's not too new. It is newer, but to a lot of players, this will be an older card. It's sort of, you lose track of what's new and what's not new when you've been playing the game for some years, but it's not brand new. It came out, I think, about 1.5 to 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think probably when I started playing less. I usually can tell if there's like a card that sounds at all familiar, if I really know it, if I like this completely new to me. So this is really fresh eyes, and I mean you can have 3 of them, but I'm just concerned for it makes me want to play it. It makes me want to pick this up. Can they stack, by the way?
Yes, they can stack, and there is a card called Emergency Measures, which is a 2k British order. It says, choose and discard a Spitfire card from your hand to add a copy of this RAF Ground Crew to your support line. So there is also ways of getting more of them into your deck, essentially, at quite a high cost, of course, discarding an entire Spitfire card to get one of these into play. But there is some sort of methods to getting them stacked up on the board, and you can reduce the cost of Spitfires to 0, which is, you know, I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah, but I know you, and I know you like to mess with me, and you lead me down ways astray, and I know your game. I know you were telling me just how rare Heavy Armor 2 is, like that was bloody gold dust to have, and then sucked me into the stinker of the Shard V1. So I'm taking anything you say with a pinch of salt until I get my staples or stinkers answers in. This card looks really fun. It looks like it makes me want. I mean, doing this makes me want to play the game generally, but this particularly makes me want to go, oh, I want to see how that works. And I would probably have a terrible time doing it, and then it'll come off once, and I'll be like, that was the best thing ever. So I think your whole deck sort of, I presume, would have to be pretty tailored to do that, and that's a big committal. But at the top level, which is sort of what we're trying to talk about, is what you do. But then I'd argue it's probably quite inflexible if you're having a very Spitfire heavy deck. So I'm going to say it sounds really fun, and I want to play it, and potentially really good. But I'm going to say, sadly, I think it's a stinker.
So, much to the sadness and tragedy of the entire community, it is in fact a stinker. And this card has been tried because it is so fun and just so lovable. It's sort of like a teddy bear. You want to love it. You're drawn in. Or maybe like a small puppy. This card is the small puppy of cards. You have to go and give it a little cuddle. But unfortunately, much like small puppies, it's not so good in wartime. It doesn't quite get it done. It's got 4 defense, so it's fairly easy to kill. It's got 0 attack, so your opponent isn't going to lose anything when they hit it. So if you drop this on turn 3, you have to pass back the turn and wait an entire turn before you can even try and get any payoff from it. And then, if you do get the payoff, you are then, like you say, forced into a Spitfire deck, which, they can have a lot of high stats and they can cheese out some games. Sometimes you drop this early on and you just cheese out an entire game, and it is the most enjoyable thing you will ever do. Putting down these huge fighters and your opponent looking at your board and you're like, yeah, I've got 3 9/9s that can hit you from the back line. What are you going to do about it? I'm just going to kill you in 1 turn. It's so enjoyable, and I have built Countess decks with this, and I will build Countess decks with this, and I do seriously hope one day this card becomes 100% viable, but unfortunately at the moment it asks quite a lot from you in sort of delaying your strategy, and also just the deck building restrictions. I think that's really a big part of why this card suffers, is you're forcing yourself to play a tribal deck, and in Cards, tribal decks aren't really where they need to be. We've got a T-34 sort of tribal thing, we've got an Aichi tribal thing, and they're just not really, they're not there. They've not got enough support yet, or they haven't got enough viable support to be strong in a competitive environment, which is okay, because you can still play these in a non-competitive environment, and it is an absolute ball of a time. But unfortunately, when it comes to tournament play, when it comes to high-end ladder, RAF Ground Crew is sadly a stinker, but will always be a staple in our hearts.
Yeah.
You've done pretty well today. I believe you got them 4 out of 5 right, which, considering I thought we had the most difficult set of cards to date. In fact, this RAF Ground Crew and Spitfire was selected by the same person who specifically said, show them the Spitfire first, so they see a staple Spitfire, and then hit them with the RAF Ground Crew and see if you can't trick them to keep going down this Spitfire sort of path. So the Spitfire Mark II was this whole time a little bit of a bait. Obviously, it was a great suggestion in itself, because it could very easily have tripped you up, but it was also there to try and set up the ground crew. So I'm proud of the efforts from the community and ourselves in trying to trip you up. But you've done really well for yourself with 4 out of 5.
Yeah, I'm chuffed, and I feel like people are raising the stakes, and I absolutely hate it because I'm the one that has to suffer it. But I also love the fact that the people, the community and the people giving the suggestions are going down these psychological routes of trying to mess with me. And I hate you because you're messing with me, but I love it because I love a good being messed with. And also you yourself, dropping some clever little things to make me think things, and I love it. That card in particular, I'm glad that sentiment was shared. I was also just thinking, if you had 2 of them, then your backline or wherever it's going to be is likely going to be quite full, and trying to get that many planes down is difficult, and you don't really want to have to waste a turn moving your planes up usually. You can do, but that's not how I used to play them. But I was going to ask, what do you think it needs to become, do you think if it goes 2-1 or has a little bit of damage, does it suddenly then become OP, or what do you think?
It's a good question. There's a few different ways people have approached trying to buff this card. Some people have talked about giving it smoke screen to try and protect it, and maybe a reduction on health to make it weaker to warders if you give it smoke screen. But I think generally these smokescreen units that want to sit in smokescreen, personally, I'm not as big of a fan of them. There are a few which, play a very important role in the sort of cards ecosystem, but I think for me personally, I prefer smokescreen as a mechanic of delaying a unit's activation rather than never activating it, and having it behave sort of like an enchantment from magic or something. And then, you could give it just sort of one attack so it can fight back. However, I think one of the issues with RAF Ground Crew isn't necessarily with RAF Ground Crew instead, but more the fact that the Spitfire Tribal deck is just very vulnerable to so many different strategies. You're weak to getting rushed by aggressive decks because, you need to reach this turn 3 to put down the ground crew. Most ramp cards, the earliest you're going to get them is turn 2, so it doesn't really accelerate you there at all. And then, then turn 3 you put down this, turn 4 you start putting down big stats on the board. At that point, against like a Jagro or a Heinz deck, you might have lost half your health already. So it's a little bit too slow to try and sort of keep up with these aggressive decks. And then against control decks, your RAF Ground Crews are very weak to removal. There's a lot of things like Tactical Strike that can kill them. But also, there's a lot of AoE in the game that is really good against large amounts of stats. There's a lot of things which can sort of reduce their health or pin them and this sort of stuff. So right now in cards, raw stats on their own aren't quite enough to win you games. And most of the Spitfires are just big boys. They have a lot of stats. There is a Polish one, which it has deployment, gives something +1/+1 on guard. This one's quite nice because you give the ground crew +1/+1 on guard. Now the ground crew doubles as protection, but can also protect itself and fight back. So I think the thing the Spitfire deck might need in the future to become more viable is for the Spitfires themselves to be different, for the Spitfires themselves to have abilities, rather than just being extremely large statted fighters. I think that might be part of the problem. But then also just more early game options. Right now there's you've got the emergency measures for turn 2. There is an Arvo Anson, it's a little fighter which is sort of Spitfires, but it's not a good early drop. I think they just need a little bit more sort of support and, a little bit of tender love and care to get where they need to be competitively viable, if that's something the game developers even want. Obviously, not every deck is ever going to be competitively viable, and unfortunately that's just the way game design sometimes is. Some things aren't intended to be meta, some things are just intended to be a barrel of laughs.
Yeah, no, it definitely it looks fun, and as I said, it immediately makes me want to play it. And so yeah, I'm pleased. But yeah, really challenging round. I forgot how challenging and fun this is. So I'll happily take my 4 out of 5 and run, I think, this week.
I think we're going to have to up the ante a little bit and think of some even better ones, which just makes me think, what options are there? And, there are plenty. We recently had a new expansion, so I think we're going to try and pull some cards out of that. I just wanted to give them a bit longer because I don't want to be labeling something as a stinker and then a week later it becomes meta. It'd be a little bit embarrassing. But thank you for joining us. It's been lovely. Thank you everyone for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what cards we should use against Gasper in the future. We can try and maybe get him to be 1-4 instead of 4-1 next time. We're still waiting for the undefeated 5-0, which we're all hoping for. But all in due time. Maybe we've got stuff planning. Maybe we're going to launch some sort of surprise attack. But thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you all next time.
Before you leave, make sure to take a look at our Discord server, a friendly hub where you can continue the fun after you watch our content by chatting with the Topdeckers team and the rest of the community. If you wish to take on a more special role, you can also check out our Patreon and enjoy the perks that come with helping us bring you the best content possible. See you in the next video!